Hi, everyone. I'm Amber Hanover. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the community engagement lead here at Mass. I have long brown hair, red glasses, and I'm wearing a beige flowered shirt with a gray cardigan. I am sitting in front of a white blurred background. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am a fourth generation of settlers and I'm coming to you from Treaty 4 territory. I am thankful to have been raised here and for the ability to live, work, and gather on this land. Mass's work and support reaches lands covered by treaties 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 10, currently known as the province of Saskatchewan, comprised of the territories of the Nehiyawak, Anishinaabeg, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Métis, and Nakoda nations. My land acknowledgement is the beginning of my journey of reconciliation and an expression of my gratitude to those whose territory we reside on and are visiting. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Today, I'm introducing Ashley, the Provincial Director of CNIB for Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Ashley will be discussing how museums can make their exhibitions and programs more accessible to individuals living with visual impairments. Making museums aware of the kinds of barriers that their community encounters when trying to engage with museums and museums activities will help us adapt to better meet our community's needs and create barrier-free access. Just as a reminder, this recorded chat will be available on our YouTube channel, as well as a link to today's full transcript. Ashley, I will pass it over to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to start up a PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so please let me know if you're not able to see the screen. However, I will be kind of describing everything that's on my PowerPoint today. So I'm excited to be here today to chat with you a little bit about accessibility for the blind and partially sighted community within museums and accessing programs. So on the screen on our first slide, we have the CNIB logo, which is a black brushstroke with CNIB in capital letters inside of it. Underneath that, it says accessibility in museums. On this slide, we have the overview. So today, we're just going to chat a little bit about who is CNIB, what do we do, areas to consider for accessibility. We're going to talk a lot about our clear print guidelines, as well as we're going to touch on social media and creating an inclusive environment. I will leave time at the end for questions, but if you do have something that you want me to clarify as I go through, please unmute and just interrupt me. I won't be able to see if anybody's hand is up or anything like that. So the CNIB is an organization whose mission is to change what it is to be blind through innovative programs and powerful advocacy that enable Canadians impacted by blindness to live the lives that they choose. We're a national charity and we provide community-based support, knowledge, and a national voice. We were established in 1918 out of two major events, which were the Halifax explosion and World War I. We evolved out of those two major events as the primary provider of vision rehab in Canada. We now currently have 3 arms of CNIB in Saskatchewan and across the country. So we now have Vision Loss Rehabilitation Saskatchewan, or VLR, and VLR is funded by the provincial government. We have CNIB Deafblind Community Services, which is funded by the provincial government as well. And then we have CNIB Foundation, which we are still funded by donors and fundraising activities. We do not have any funding from the government. We run programs, so we offer programs under different pillars in alignment with our current strategic plan. And so those pillars are LIVE. So these LIVE programs provide support and services to enhance the daily living skills of anyone with sight loss and help them realize their goals and seize their future with confidence. Play. Our play programs foster an active and healthy lifestyle and give children, youth, and older adults the opportunity to connect with others, thus reducing the stigma and social isolation that many face. Work is our next pillar, and work programs provide Canadians with sight loss with the skills and resources to attain their career ambitions, thrive academically at every stage, and hone their abilities as an entrepreneur and mentor. The next pillar is Learn, and our Learn programs focus on education, skills training, and Braille literacy to empower youth and older adults to achieve their goals by fostering social skills and independence. Our last pillar is technology, and technology programs level the playing field for Canadians with sight loss through the power of technology by providing skills training that focus on the accessible, available, and affordable technology. So when we look at, places like museums or other things like that are similar, often the areas that need to be addressed for individuals with sight loss are navigational barriers, signage, lighting, contrast, digital content, training, and descriptions. I myself am someone who is blind, so I am totally blind. I don't have any vision at all and utilize a guide dog. So through my own experience and working with CNIB, I myself face many of these barriers, every single day trying to access buildings and services and programs. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our clear print guidelines. And generally when we talk about accessibility for individuals who are blind or partially sighted, the biggest question I get is, how do we get that information to individuals? And so our clear print guidelines really, talk about print materials, but they also translate into signage. They also translate into, exhibits or, running programs. These are all things that can really help people to have a better idea of where to start. Now, blindness is a spectrum. And so there are individuals who can see large print, all the way to individuals like myself who don't see anything at all. I don't have any light, shadow perception at all. So, print isn't an option for me. But a large portion of the blind community sees something, whether that is large print up close or color or shape or contrast. 90% of individuals who fall in that spectrum of blind have some remaining vision. And so often when we think about blindness, we think like myself where it's nothing at all, when in reality, I'm a very small percentage of that community. Like I said, only about 10% of the community are individuals like myself where we don't have any vision. So it's really important that we understand that blindness very much is a spectrum, and we everybody's experience is different. No two individuals will have that same experience. So these are just guidelines, a place to start. They're not going to be the be all end all for everyone, but they're a great place to start. So number one is contrast. And contrast is huge, and not only within print, within navigation, within signage, within lighting, like all of those areas that I touched on earlier. So high contrast colors for text and background. So an example would be black or dark blue text on a white or yellow background, or white or yellow text on a dark blue or background. And then at the end of this, I put what not to do, and I've used a green font. And so white and green, for example, that it's a terrible contrast, and more often than not, we're seeing people using color. And so the best contrast for most people is white on black, or sorry, black on white, or white on black, black on yellow. Those are the most common ones that people will gravitate towards. So type color is also, really important. So printed materials are most readable in black and white. If you're using colored text, really restrict that to titles, headlines, or highlighting material. So for example, if you must, use red, only use it for, say, highlighting a word or two or a title. As much as possible, keeping it to those clear, black and white materials is best. And this goes for not only for individuals who are blind or partially sighted, but a lot of these things actually, are easier for sighted individuals to see, or seniors or children. So it really is, kind of hits everyone. Point size, bigger is better. So keeping your text large, between 12 and 18 points, depending on the font. The point size does vary between fonts. We generally don't do anything less than 14 point. It's large enough that individuals can see it with a magnifier quite easily, but it's not too big that if you were to hand it to someone who's sighted, they'd be like, something is off here. So generally 14 is where we start. So, but depending on that font that you are using, we say between 12 and 18 point font, and that goes for signage, that goes for printed materials, everything that you're printing. Leading. So leading is a space between lines of text. It should be at least 25 to 30% of the point size. So this helps readers move their eyes more easily to the next line of text. Heavier typefaces require more leading. So for example, in this presentation, PowerPoint creates terrible leading. So this is a perfect example. There's not a lot of space in between the lines of text, which makes it seem very jumbled and garbled. And so when you can have more space in between, a heading and then the text and then a space and then the text, and even, in between the lines of text is really helpful. It really helps people to be able to track better. Font family and font styles. So avoid complicated or decorative fonts. Choose standard fonts with upper and lowercase characters. Arial and Verdana are excellent choices. Whenever you write something in all capital letters, it becomes very difficult to see. A lot of individuals who are blind or partially sighted aren't looking at the word in each letter individually. They're looking at the shape of the word a lot of the times, and so when we write things in all capital letters, it really hinders the ability for them to pick it up. And so making sure that you're not using all capital letters whenever possible is really important. Font heaviness. So choosing fonts with medium heaviness and avoid light type with thin strokes. So when emphasizing a word or passage, use a bold or heavy font. Italics or uppercase letters are not recommended. Generally speaking, when we're trying to highlight something, a lot of people will try to use italics. It doesn't translate that well for individuals who are partially sighted. Bolding that, that phrase or something like that works much better for individuals. The next is letter spacing. Don't crowd your text. So keep a wide space between letters. Choose a mono-spaced font rather than one that is proportionately spaced. If you're choosing an Arial or a Verdana, they're great. They don't seem really crowded. Margins and columns. So separate text into columns to make it easier to read, as it requires less eye movement and less peripheral vision. When possible, use wide binding margins or spiral bindings. Flat pages work best for vision aids such as magnifiers. So if you're making print materials like a pamphlet or a booklet, the ability for it to lay completely flat is most useful for individuals who are partially sighted. So that makes it a lot easier for them to be able to use a magnifier, or for myself, to scan that text with my phone so that it can read it back to me. When the pages are kind of at a point where they can't open fully, it really reduces the ability to scan that text or use a magnifier. Paper finish. So using a matte or non-glossy finish to cut down on glare reduces distractions. Avoid using watermarks or complicated backgrounds. We see a lot of like brochures that are very glossy, and that becomes very difficult for people to see because of the glare. It also increases the glare for magnifiers and scanning purposes to be able to get that information. So whenever possible, try to reduce that glossiness of any printed materials. And then watermarks or complicated backgrounds are another one. So the busier that the paper is, or the background, the harder it is for individuals to be able to see and decipher, that material. And then the last kind of clear print guideline is clean design and simplicity. Use distinctive colors, sizes, and shapes on the covers of materials to make them easier to tell apart. So really, in short, it's about keeping it very basic, clear, and uncluttered. And like I said, these guidelines are for printed materials, but they also translate into signage. They translate into if you have trying to think of the correct term. If you have write-ups of an exhibit, for example, or information on an exhibit, these clear print guidelines will help that help individuals be able to access that material. The second part of accessibility for individuals who are blind or partially sighted, with the biggest barrier, comes down to navigation. And so it's looking at things like entryways. Is there a clear contrast for someone to be able to find that entryway, where the door is? Are there contrasting tape or paint on the nosing of stairs? And a lot of the times we'll see people don't want to make it super obvious, right? That it's an accessibility feature. So on a set of cement stairs, they'll use black as the nosing, and they're like, well, it's contrasting, but unfortunately black and gray are too close, and so it doesn't show up for individuals who are blind or partially sighted. And so using something that's very bright, like a yellow, is really good. Or if you have black stairs, using a white. Whenever possible, making that nosing texturized will help individuals like myself who are totally blind, because we can use that texture. We can feel it under our feet to be able to help us to navigate as well. The other area that we often face is signage. And so there's generally a lack of signage to help people to navigate. So, giving people directional cues as to where they're going. But the other side of that is the signage should always include Braille, so that individuals who are blind are able to also read that signage. And so having good contrasting signage is very important. Generally, signage, we say to use the black with white text is the most accessible, and generally will contrast enough from the walls around it for individuals to be able to find it. So it's not only about the signage itself being accessible, but can I find that signage as someone who's blind or partially sighted? Contrast to distinguish between different areas or transitions. And so what I mean by this is, as you're moving through a space, is there a good contrast between the wall and the floor, or any archways and things like that? So for example, if you have beige walls and a beige carpet, that's going to be really difficult for individuals who are blind or partially sighted to be able to navigate, because it's going to look flat. It's all going to kind of blend together. And so having contrast is really important. And that doesn't mean, that if you have beige walls and a beige floor, that you need to like paint the walls or paint the floor. Sometimes it's really just about putting a contrasting strip along the wall to let that person know that there is a definite, walkway there. Lighting is another one. And so sometimes we've heard from individuals in the community when trying to access places like museums, art galleries, different areas like that, a lot of the time the lighting isn't adequate enough for them to be able to read any of the signage or find their way around. And so there's different ways to go about that, because it has to work for everyone. But even just offering things like a flashlight or a magnifier with a light for individuals who are partially sighted and struggle with the light. Some individuals see really well in dim light. They see better because of the amount of light that their eyes take in, whereas others, as soon as the light is dim, they see nothing at all. So it really depends on the person's condition, where their vision's at. So it's really difficult to hit everyone, because there isn't a blanket fix for everyone. Everyone is very, very different. And so it's really just about, optimizing what you have and being open to offering solutions and working with people to be able to access that information. Sighted guide is really is a big one. I put it under navigation. So sighted guide is a way in which individuals who are sighted would be able to help someone who's blind or partially sighted navigate. They do so by asking first if that individual would like assistance. If they say no, make sure to respect that. If they say yes, you can offer your arm. And what they're going to do is they're going to take the back of your elbow and they're going to use call it C grip, but they're going to hold onto the back of your elbow with their hand, and they're going to walk 1 to 2 paces behind you so that you can guide them, giving them verbal instructions like, we're going to be going right, we're going to be going left, we're going through a doorway, stopping at the top and the bottom of stairs, letting them know how many stairs. But another big one here is around directions. And so I can't tell you how many times I've been, somewhere with my family or, by myself, and I've wanted to check out, an exhibit or something, and I'll ask, how do I get to the bathroom? That's a really common one. And somebody will say to me, just go down the hall over there and, just keep going, and then it'll be on your right just past that. But they actually haven't told me at all where the bathroom is. So making sure that individuals who are working within those spaces understand how to give directions appropriately for someone who's blind or partially sighted. So, take a left down the hall that's just to your left. You're going to go about 50 paces and the door is going to be on your right. That helps someone get there, right? But over there, this way, that way, pointing, those are all very, they're useless for someone who is blind or partially sighted. But unfortunately, they're how a lot of people give directions nowadays, because we're such a visual society. And so if you think about, when's the last time you gave someone directions and they said, oh, just that way, or you said just over there. So making sure that individuals know how to give directions appropriately for someone who's blind or partially sighted. So I'm going to talk a little bit about digital content. And nowadays, digital content is so important in how we get our information out and how we bring people into our spaces. But it is one of the areas that we forget about accessibility. And so whenever you're creating digital content, whether that be emails, social media posts, anything that is digital, it's so important to take into account the accessibility of that content and how individuals are accessing that content. So if they're accessing it on a phone or a computer, is that content accessible for someone who's using a screen reader? Is the content, accessible for someone who's partially sighted? Is it clear? Does it follow those clear print guidelines that we talked about? So the biggest one is around alt text and image description. So if you put an image or a visual in any digital content, it should always have alt text or an image description. So alt text is in the background. So sighted individuals would not see that. As I was scrolling through, let's use Facebook, for example. If I was scrolling through your Facebook feed and there was an image and you would put alt text, I would hear with my screen reader, image of children playing in a park, for example. But someone who is sighted and not using a screen reader would not see that text. The alternative to that is that image description goes into the post. So in the post, it would say image description and then children playing in a park. The image description and alt text doesn't need to be super detailed. It doesn't need to be three children playing in a park. One's wearing a red shirt and blue pants and has blonde hair, and one has brown hair and a yellow shirt, and they're playing with a white and black soccer ball, and there's a swing set in the back. It's really just about giving context to that image. So children playing in a park is sufficient. Individuals walking down a sidewalk chatting, again, that's sufficient information to be able to distinguish what's in that photo. And it's also important to make sure that those images are relevant to the post, right? And so sometimes people can get in the habit of just putting an image to draw people to it, which is great, but make sure that the image is relevant to the post, because if it's three individuals walking down a sidewalk chatting, and then the post is about a train, it's not really going to make any sense for someone who's blind or partially sighted. They're going to feel like they've missed something. So those are really important features. And alt text and image description goes for if you're using like GIFs or GIFs. I don't know how people say that. If you're using any of those, memes, photos, even images, like your logo, anything like that. Making sure that digital content follows clear print guidelines. So all of those things that we went over. Screen readers. So making sure that content follows the standards to be able to be used by a screen reader. So generally, if the content is well laid out, has appropriate headings that are labeled in the website, links are labeled in the website, those things all make it a lot easier for individuals to use the screen reader and access that content. Clear navigation. And what I mean by that is having headings labeled, links labeled, and making sure that you're not having to go through 60 different tabs and buried things to be able to find it. Because that can be really difficult for individuals with screen readers to be able to navigate through all of that content, because they can't just skim through that content. They have to go line by line by line, heading by heading by heading through your entire website. So if I have to spend 45 minutes just trying to find the contact button, for example, I'm probably not going to. I'm just going to give up rather than, continuing on to find that content. So making sure that there's some clear navigation when it comes to digital content is important. Creating an inclusive environment. A big portion of making a more accessible space is making a space or creating accessible buildings, programming, exhibits is really about understanding how best to help someone who is blind or partially sighted, and being open to helping someone who's blind or partially sighted to access those things. A big one is etiquette. And what I mean by etiquette is things like speaking to the individual who's blind or partially sighted, not to someone who's with them. So if I ask a question, it's answering that question to myself, not asking, say, my husband with me. Not speaking louder or slower to someone who is blind or partially sighted, using your regular voice and tone. Not petting or distracting service animals or guide dogs, and also understanding the laws and legislation that exist for individuals who are blind or partially sighted and use guide dogs to be able to access your space is a big one. Giving directions. I put this in here twice on purpose. So the same as what I was talking about earlier, using left, right, north, south. A good one is clock method. So at 12 o'clock, you'll find the bathroom. At 3 o'clock, you'll find the hallway to the meeting rooms, for example. Clock method is really an easy one. Guide dogs. Again, it's understanding the legislation and laws that exist to allow guide dogs into all public spaces that can be accessed. The only exception to this rule is the operating room. Otherwise, guide dogs are allowed anywhere. Guide dogs are not to be distracted, pet, or talked to. If the dog is paying attention to you, they're not doing their job, and it's distracting the dog. So making sure that anyone in the space who, especially those who are working or volunteering, understand that you can't control the public, but if you can, make sure that staff and volunteers are educated in that area, that goes a long way. And then assistance. And so it's really about asking. So, are you needing help today? How can I help you best? The individual who's blind or partially sighted knows best what works for them. And like I said, it is a spectrum. No two people have the same experience. So asking them is the best way to understand how to best help them, and then be open to, figuring out how you can go forward and help them to access the materials, the programs, or the space. There are other opportunities outside of these are kind of the minimal, things that I've talked about. We have seen, audio tours that are available in different museums and art galleries and things like that, where people are wearing headphones that have like a little box, and it takes them on an audio tour of the space. Audio options for exhibits, so wherever there's information where people would read, having the ability to scan a QR code or push a button to get that information via audio. We have also, there's places that offer sighted guide tours. And so an individual can, book a sighted guide tour where it's a volunteer or staff member who gives a tour of the exhibit, or all those things, by a sighted guide, and is trained to do so. And then the last one that I wanted to talk about is to ask your community. And so CNIB has offices across Canada. We have 2 offices in Saskatchewan, one in Regina and one in Saskatoon. And many people in our community who are blind or partially sighted are more than willing to, come in and visit your space and walk through and see if they can easily access that information, or how could it be improved, or answer any questions that you may have. So I encourage you to reach out to the CNIB, and we can put you in touch with individuals in your communities, whether that's a small town or a large city. There's individuals who are blind or partially sighted in every community across Canada. And so we are more than happy to work with organizations, to connect them with the community, to be able to ask those questions, because they are the best people to answer all of the questions and to help you better understand how you can enhance your space. So that is the end of my, formal presentation, but I do want to open it up for questions, because that is a lot of information. Unfortunately, it's not a small topic at all. I'm sure I could go on for hours and hours about different things that are available. So if anyone has any specific questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Ashley. I've turned my camera back on here. I'll just moderate here. I don't know if anybody wants to type in the chat, or if anybody has any specific questions at all, I can moderate or read them out as needed. Again, preferably put on your camera, or let me know, I guess, by raising your hand if anybody has anything. Okay. Hi, Jen. So Jen is here from the Moose Jaw Museum and Art Gallery, and she has a question here for you. Ooh. Sorry, Jen, you'll have to unmute.
There we go. Thanks so much, Ashley, for your presentation this morning. I was just wondering if we were to get some of our printed materials created in Braille, where could we have that done?
So through CNIB, we have it's called our Braille room. And so if you look on our website, we provide Braille transcription services for organizations. And so it depends on what it is and what you're looking to have transcribed. But yeah, that is offered through the CNIB. So I would just go on our website and type in Braille transcription, and it will come up.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I guess I'll ask a question here. With experiences with just going back to some of the digital content, it's something that I know I've just started acknowledging and doing with some of the images, and especially the alt text. Would you recommend, and it's something that I've done, so I'm just asking if this is something that you would recommend, is for people to install something like a screen reader on their desktop, or like Safari, to kind of navigate a little better to see what you would be then hearing?
No, that's a tough one. So no, I wouldn't say so. How someone who's blind or partially sighted would use a screen reader is very different from someone who's sighted would use a screen reader. And so it gets quite complicated in how we navigate. And so it probably wouldn't be overly helpful for someone who's sighted. What I will say, though, is if you've put in the alt text, there should be no reason why it wouldn't show up, like how it would read. And so whatever you type is what will read out. Another thing I will caution people when it comes to digital content, especially websites, is if you Google accessibility for your website, there will be hundreds of these things that come up, and it's like an overlay for your website that will make it accessible. And I use air quotes there because it doesn't. They take your money, and it does nothing. They don't actually create an accessible website. In fact, sometimes it makes it worse. So if it's an overlay for a website, or on an add-in that you can pay $100 for and it'll fix your entire website, it's definitely one of those it's too good to be true type situations, and it's not going to make your website or your content more accessible.
On that note here too, then, something like a widget, so something that we've added to our Mass website that can change the view of it for individual users. Is that something that you have heard does make it more accessible as opposed to those full overlays?
It depends on the widget. So like, are you talking the ones that will be able to like help you like change the font or the contrast, those types of things? Those do work.
Yeah.
So depending on the widget, yeah, that will work. Those are great because it does allow people to change the contrast if they prefer yellow on black, for example, or change the font size. Those are generally helpful.
And again, just thinking about our own website here, as I, I even have trouble navigating some of the things, but when it comes to things like headers with drop downs, is that kind of what you were referring to as trying to find, all that content? So for example, on our website, we have who we are, what we do, news and events, but then when you click on it, there's like, under things we do, there's like 16 things. Is that something, like what would be the easiest way to navigate or have it set up to navigate? Does that work for you? Or again, is that what you were kind of referring to as being the, try to search, can't find it, kind of give up situation?
Yeah, no, so as long as they're labeled appropriately. So if it's labeled as like a link for about us, events, those things. If it's labeled as a link, then what happens is when I go into that website, I use a keystroke that will bring up a links list, right? And so then can go through and I can, with arrow keys, read each link to see if I can find what I'm looking for. So as long as they're labeled appropriately, then that's fine. And same with headings. I could do the same for headings. I can bring up a headings list. And so if I know I'm looking for your events page, for example, as long as it's labeled appropriately, I can definitely navigate through those drop downs and things like that. It's when they're not labeled at all, or they're labeled as a button, but it's not really a button. It's a heading or it's a link.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. And again, I think it's something that I've come across too is, and I mean, mistake me if I'm wrong too, but even the ability to see all of the URLs and that they're labeled appropriately too. So I have an event that is, let's say, our community chat. It says, SAS Museums / community chat / and then say CNIB. So making sure that URL is listed correctly as well. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Perfect. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? I mean, we could go into this quite extensively.
Hi, Ashley, it's Carol. I'm from Remy Modern, and we have been developing a program of where our program guides have taken some training in writing and delivering described tours. And I'm just wondering, kind of my usual worry is about being able to connect with the community when these things are available to make sure that people, the community that might use them and might be interested in accessing them knows that they're happening? And is it just to work through the CNIB is the best way? Like, is there regular information that goes out to the community from the CNIB?
Yeah, of course. So we have regular newsletters and communication that goes out. So if you do have programs that are specific to individuals who are blind or partially sighted, who could benefit, like described tours or anything like that, reach out to us, and we're happy to share that information with our clients in the area. So if it's in Saskatoon or Regina or wherever, we're happy to share that information and to promote that on our social media when possible, because a lot of people don't know that these things are available or think that they're not available to them. So whenever there's any programs that are create an accessible environment for individuals who are blind or partially sighted, we're more than happy to share that with our community.
Thank you so much. And thanks for, it was a really, really thorough presentation you did this morning. I think that's probably why there aren't that many questions. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I just keep nodding. I'm like, yeah, it says I've taken like 4 pages of notes in that. So that's really great. Looking at the idea of the inclusive environment. So just as, I don't know if you can go through possibilities of like your experiences coming into, a museum space or an art gallery. And if you have any examples of what, really work just on a, you walk into a space, or if there was somewhere that worked really well, and you don't have to name space, for instance, but, or something that didn't work. I know you went through a lot of the, outline of how spaces could look. I'm just curious if there's a place that you have been that worked great, or if there was a place that you've been that it has, not worked at all for you.
Mm-hmm. Generally, the places that work well are places where when you walk in and someone greets you and it's hi, welcome, how best can we help you to be able to access our space today, and then taking that. So whether it's offering the ability for sighted guide or direction or things like that. The one place that I will say does a really good job of accessibility for individuals who are blind or partially sighted is the Winnipeg Human Rights Museum. But a lot of that's designed for individuals who are blind or partially sighted, and so they do a really, really good job of it. They're, I would say, a leader in that space in Canada that I've been. They do a really good job, but I think a lot of spaces do a really good job as long as individuals are asking how they can help and being open to doing that. I think the spaces that haven't worked out well is when I go somewhere and I ask if there's someone who could assist me navigate or give me more information or walk me through the exhibit, and the answer is no, that's not a service we offer, or you'd have to bring someone with you, or don't you have an attendant, those types of things. That's when I'm like, okay, and most individuals like myself, it's just you leave and you don't come back, right? So it's just being open and inclusive and welcoming to everyone.
Yeah, I shook my head at that, because the idea of any sort of service you're offering to anybody, to be able to walk into a space and them acknowledge how to service or help you in any way, goes for everybody. Again, I do ask this, I think in the last couple chats we've had, especially about like inclusivity and stuff, is the stigmas or the ideas of somebody walking into a space, and what is the best way, or how do you help acknowledge your loss of sight to somebody in a space when you do enter, for someone working in service and having somebody come in and just saying, hi, hello, can I help, what can I help you with? Just as an example, what kind of introduction would you give to allow this, the person doing the service to assist you best?
Mhm. So for individuals like myself, when I come into a space, it's going to be obvious, right? Like I have a white cane with me or my guide dog, and I'll probably run into a few things on my way to to find the counter, so it's quite obvious, for individuals like myself. So I don't really typically have to say, oh, I'm visually impaired or blind. Would somebody be able to help me? Now, there's a lot of individuals within the blind community who don't use a white cane or a guide dog. They don't use anything at all because they have enough remaining vision that they are able to navigate, but still might need some help in a new space. So most individuals would, ask for assistance finding, generally like the counter or something if it's not obvious. And then generally we'll say, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm visually impaired and I'm interested in accessing your exhibit today. Is there any assistance that is available? So it's next to impossible for someone to know if someone has vision loss or sight loss, unless it's, like I said, for myself, it's very obvious. When I walk in with a guide dog or a white cane, if there is no guide dog or white cane, it really has to be up to the individual to seek out that assistance and to help and to ask for help. But generally, if they're wanting that type of help, they, would identify themselves as someone who's blind or partially sighted, or people use various terms. So you'll hear legally blind, visually impaired, partially sighted. It really varies on the term that is used because it's a personal preference, and some of it has to do with generation, and some of it has to do with where you grew up and what people call name it as. It's very personal kind of preference as to what term they use.
Speaking on that, just about the terms, is there any terms we should avoid? Again, you said, people have their personal preference in that regard. Is there any terms we should avoid if we're, say advertising, an exhibit that is accessible, and then we want to list, the specifics of that accessibility? Is there anything that is kind of, we shouldn't use as a word?
Yeah, the terms that you should use when advertising something would be blind and partially sighted. So I would avoid legally blind, visually impaired, those things. I would use blind and or partially sighted.
Okay, great. Yeah, sorry, I was writing that down with a big star beside it. Again, I know the importance of working as a designer too, the contrast and the visibility, accessibility of some of those fonts and images and stuff. Is there a digital content that you find doesn't work for you? Not necessarily a specific site, but even just, and I mean, maybe because I'm not sure like your research into a lot of these like sites and stuff, but I know there's site developers and things that don't work as even usability for myself to maintain and create and update. There's a lot more of those plug and play kind of text boxes, and there's outside of a lot of the old kind of design format coding for websites. Is there anything that you have found that's new that people might know of, but it just actually doesn't work?
No, for the most part, most of them can be set up in a way that can be accessible, but it's taking the time to make sure that it's accessible from the back end. And so sometimes it can be really useful to reach out to individuals in the blind community to just ask for them to test it. Like if you're really wondering, does my website, is it accessible? Can people access this content? reach out to, if you know someone who's blind or partially sighted, or to CNIB, and we can have individuals test out your website and see if it is accessible, and answer those questions. But it's hard to say like there's one that's better than the other.
Yeah, for sure. I know there's just so many out there now.
Yeah.
For sure. Also, like with apps and social media, are you finding, I know even Twitter has finally updated there. You can edit your image and add the alt text. Was it in the back end prior to just kind of being there, or did it just not exist at all?
It just didn't exist at all.
Wow.
So that's fairly new. So Instagram, Facebook, they've been there for a little while, but Twitter just didn't exist at all. So Twitter was actually really inaccessible. It still has a ways to go.
Yeah, for sure. I know. And I'll just make note for anybody, if just as an idea. And again, if there's any questions about some of this stuff, in my experience now posting and learning about some of this, accessibility thing on the back end. But with Twitter, you have to add the alt text. So you have to hit the edit button, then find the alt text, and then enter it. Facebook and Instagram will do an automatic kind of alt text thing, but it is 100% suggested that you go in and edit your own, just because sometimes it should be clear based on the context of what you're posting, but it might not be. And again, I think just reiterating what you were saying about, the context, but be clear and concise. It doesn't have to be too descriptive. I know looking at the automatic Facebook kind of alt text that comes up is like, maybe this, and it's like, well, maybe, but I'm like not even looking at the image going, okay, well, possibly that's the thing. So I can understand the importance of the, direct context for it, for sure.
Yeah, and I think a big one too is, if you post on Instagram and it automatically goes into like Instagram, for example, if you do the alt text in Facebook, it won't automatically transfer over. So you have to do it in both, or write the image description, and then the image description in your post will transfer over, but like the alt text will not transfer over. So it's important to know to keep that in mind too, because people say, oh, well, I did it in Facebook, but it doesn't automatically translate over.
Yeah, I can for sure see the troubles with that. If on Instagram you do a post and then you have your write-up, but if you don't have the written description in the write-up, alt text will be there, but you can post to Facebook from Instagram.
Right.
And in Facebook, it won't there. Yeah, totally. So, and that's where I think the recommendation of just adding even the image description directly in the text itself on some of these. And again, some just post pictures, right? So it could be, I find a lot of our museums or members that the stuff I'm sharing will just be a poster of an event.
Right.
Without text, right? So rather than just sharing that picture of a poster, you can share the picture of the poster, but make sure you have the text written there as well, or make sure that in the alt text, the description of the event or anything there, because again, I can see that being, that'd be troublesome. You click on something and it's just nothing. You're like, oh, what did they have to say? Nothing, right? So yeah, I think that's really important, is including, if you're including posters, any event, advertising and stuff. Yeah, you can have your image and your poster with all the text on it, but make sure you're including a text format actually as a post in some of those too.
Yeah, for sure. And another one is in emails. If you're sending out, if you have like an email list and you're sending out a poster, for example, making sure that you're sending it in a Word document or in a fully accessible PDF. PDFs generally are not accessible because they come up as images. So if you are looking to transcribe any of your, or remediate any of your PDF documents that are on your website or anything like that, I recommend a company. It's called Able Docs. So it's like Able, like ABLE, and then Docs, DOCS. They will remediate any PDFs or any documents to make them fully accessible for screen readers, braille readers, for everyone. So just keeping in mind that generally speaking, if you just hit convert on a Word document to a PDF, it's not accessible at all.
Do you have, and I guess it's just something that I do as an expert. So I create a lot of our booklets and, you know, quarterly reports and stuff. And when I do convert it from a PDF, and again, I've never looked to see what, you know, the check marks are for accessibility, but it's an interactive PDF. Do those work?
It depends. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It really depends on the PDF and what is what's included and how it's laid out for some of those. So it's hard to say without testing it. So
okay, yeah, for sure. Okay, that makes sense. And again, I think that's where the importance of some of these documents and stuff that we do, you know, create and send out as PDFs, having those descriptions, but also, yeah, the recommendation for able docs to make that accessible, but also, again, just being able to reach out and ask, right, someone in our community or CNIB if this is working. And I think that's the most important thing, is just to look at the overall, okay, for everyone, does this work? So reaching out to you, CNIB, and saying, okay, does this work? You know, because then we know for sure and we're not missing anything.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, Carol from Rebe just said, excuse me, she had to head to a meeting, so thank you so much. I think I just want to speak on, and maybe you could speak on a little bit more. I know we've got a little bit of time here, but you know, us being open as a service, as an organization, I think the comment about etiquette was really important. Being able to speak directly to the person, you know, knowing the regulations and laws, excuse me, but really just asking, you know, how we can help. Because again, like you said, it's really up to the individual of, you know, what kind of services they would need.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, if you're wanting some like sensitivity training around how to give sighted guide, what is the etiquette, you know, how to properly help someone who's blind or partially sighted, because people just aren't sure, that is something that CNIB does. So we'd be more than happy to come out and you know, do a training session with staff or volunteers around how to do sighted guide, how to offer assistance, you know, best ways, you know, that kind of thing.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really good to know. We just had Marilyn from Lanigan here say excellent and informative presentation. Thank you so much, Ashley. So yeah, I guess if nobody else has any questions or comments, Ashley, did you have anything you wanted to finish up on here, or?
No, I think, you know, just overall, if anybody has any questions or that, you know, that come up, or anything specific about, you know, a specific exhibit or, you know, website, something like that, please reach out, and I can put you in touch with the correct people within CNIB. We do have a lot of information as well on our website, so cnib.ca. So, you know, check that out and see if you can't find what you're looking for, or it's easier, feel free to reach out.
Okay, great. And I do have one more. Sorry, this is all like I'm learning all the things, but something like I did in the introduction and stuff with the description of myself. Is that something that is that something you find helpful? Especially in, you know, the context that we are kind of in a Zoom world these days. A lot of stuff is online. Does that kind of etiquette translate onto Zoom for you?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it I've heard it done like a few times. I mean, it doesn't hurt, right? So, I think for context, it helps people to be able to understand a little bit better. Some people really like it. For individuals who've been blind their whole life, I've heard people say like, it doesn't really matter to me, but I mean, at the end of the day, I think, if it helps someone, or if it has the potential to help someone to better understand or to feel like they're more included, then there's no harm done. And I think, you're better off to do it than not.
Great, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ashley. Again, let me just see here. I think I have a couple notes. Yeah, so we thank you again. It's so much information. Like I said, I wrote like 4 pages of notes here. Just a reminder, we do have it posted on our YouTube channel, or will have it posted on our YouTube channel here. So please join us next time for our upcoming chats. The next one will be on August 17th. It's with the Autism Resource Center. It's about autism friendly museums and hiring practice. So thank you again so much, Ashley, and everybody for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks for having me.